Hello, so nobody asked for this, but I'm going to try to give you a brief summary recap of the entire show of CSI Miami. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to get into everything, and there are going to be spoilers, and I'm going to try to avoid things that are too convoluted. Just for an example, there is a season 7 episode called Head Case. There's also another one called Down the Wire. These episodes are like inexplicable, and I'm not saying that to say that they're bad. They're, in my opinion, quite good episodes. I haven't watched them in a while, and two, they kind of rely on a whole bunch of other episodes in order for them to make any kind of sense. That's why one time I was trying to write a fan fiction that was surrounding Down the Wire, and it was so hard to do because you had to explain like everything. And they did a good job of it in the show, but then if you try to like write it out, it's very confusing. So I'm going to try to keep this as short as humanly possible, but it is 10 seasons, and I will warn you that the most recent seasons I have watched are 4 and 5. I watched the end of 4 recently, but it's been a long time since I had started 4. And then 5 I basically watched in a period of like 2.5 weeks or something with my sister. So we shall begin at about the 2-minute mark. Okay, so what I think I'm going to do is kind of do some broad strokes first. Okay, so the first 2 seasons, basically the team consists of Horatio, who is the boss, and then Callie, Speed, and Eric, and then of course Alex. Trip is in there a lot of the time, but in the beginning episodes there's a character named Megan Donner, and I don't really like her that much. Like, she's okay, but I think they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with the show and like who all they needed to be in it, and they wanted someone to have like butt heads with Horatio, so they had her in the show. And I think basically the implication was she used to have this job before Horatio did, which doesn't actually make sense if you go to the season 8 episode. I don't know what it's called. I think it's like a rewind episode where it goes back to the past. So I don't know, I guess they forgot about that, or like they just were like, whatever, it doesn't matter. But anyway, so they were kind of figuring things out in the first 2 seasons, and I'm talking about like the people who were running the show, and they had to figure out like how it was going to be similar and how it was going to be different from the first CSI. So just a little disclaimer there. So Horatio is, of course, the boss. He's Lieutenant Kane, and he has kind of a troubled past. He had a bad, like, home life growing up. He had a brother named Ray, who is apparently dead, and I said apparently for a reason. And basically he was an undercover cop, and he died. We'll get to that. So he left behind a wife named Yelena, who Horatio actually has a crush on. And I think he wanted to marry Yelena, but somehow his brother got her, and I don't know. So Ray and Yelena had a son named Ray Jr., very creative. And basically at some point we find out that Ray, when he was undercover, he actually got another woman pregnant, and so he has a daughter that, you know, it's a plot point. I don't remember all the details because I haven't seen it in a while, and I'm not sure exactly when these things come in, but you have Callie, who is the most senior member of the team because she got there first. This is explored more in a season 8 episode, which is that rewind one. But she got there first, and she's the firearms expert. And then we have Speed. So Speed, he, I think, is mainly in charge of Trace, but the roles were a little less defined back in the first, 2 seasons, but he did a lot of Trace. That was kind of his thing. So basically what Ryan does in the later seasons is what Speed did. And he sort of acted like as an older brother figure to Eric, because Eric is the baby of their group. He's only a year younger than Callie, if you're going to take the actors who play them and extrapolate what the characters' ages are based on that. I would say Callie is about 27 at the beginning of the show, and Eric is 26. And then I would say Speed is probably older than Eric, and I don't know if he's older than Callie. Not really sure. I guess I could just look up how old Rory Cochrane is, whatever. So anyway, then you have season 2, and a lot of the same stuff is going on. Megan left relatively early in the series. Oh, and Alex is the medical examiner. And Eric does a lot of underwater recovery. He's really good with fingerprints, and he becomes even better at that as the show goes on. I think that actually becomes kind of his specialty, and underwater recovery. But you see him doing fingerprint things most of the time. But he can do everything. Basically, all the CSIs are trained at a certain level where they can kind of cross. They can do everything everybody else does. But I would say Callie has the upper hand in that she is so good at firearms that she literally runs the firearms lab. And she is also, I forget what exactly it's called, but she's the assistant day shift manager or something. And that sounds really convoluted, but essentially she is Horatio's second in command. And when you think about it, this show starts when she's 27. That's not very old. She's 27 years old, and she is the head of the firearms lab, and she's the assistant day shift manager, second in command to Horatio. It's a little more complicated in the first season because you have all those other characters, but when Megan leaves, basically it's Horatio and then her, which will be important later. But anyway, moving on. So I think sometime in the first season, maybe in the second season, Horatio found out that Ray is not really dead. Yay, I guess. He found out that Ray isn't really dead, that he had to fake his own death because of him being undercover. And eventually he is reunited with Yelena and with Ray Jr. And Horatio ships them off to Brazil to protect them, because now the jig is up because they know Ray is alive. So that's that. And another thing that happens is at one point Stetler, who is the IAB guy, he's a jerk, just for context. He is a big jerk. And he is always butting heads with Horatio, and he's always trying to get someone for something, which also will be important later. That's why I love this show. All these things come back later. I mean, pretty much everything. Not everything, but almost everything. And Statler once was being a little bit more forceful with Yelena than he was supposed to be. And she got mad at him. They broke up, and Horatio was like, no, you're not going to do that. So anyway. All right. So basically, I think it was at the end of season 2 or the beginning of season 3 when there was a planted spinoff of CSI New York, just for context. And basically, if you don't know, CSI Miami is a planted spinoff of CSI. So Cross Jurisdictions was the first episode of CSI Miami, which is an episode of CSI, the regular one. And then I'm trying to remember what it is. Is it MIA NYC Nonstop? Or is it another one? I forget what it's called, but the Miami, New York one has a very distinct title. But anyway, so I think that's the end of season 2 or the beginning of season 3. So in the beginning of season 3, Speed actually dies. And that was like, I mean, the practical reason was that I think Rory Conquerin, who played him, either didn't want to be on the show anymore or had another gig. So he ended up leaving, and so they had to kill his character. And so he died, and it was like a traumatic experience. Because when you think about it, these kids, they're basically kids. I mean, they're not, but they are, like, I don't even know that he was 30. So it was a traumatic experience, and I think it affected Callie, but like not, she doesn't let a lot show, especially in earlier seasons. And Eric, he was the one who took it, I think, the hard, like, Horatio had a hard time with it, Alex had a hard time with it, but I think Eric really took it hard. One, he's the baby of their group, and that, like, scarred him for life. Like, he still thinks about it seasons and seasons past. And this will actually come up in season 6. I was trying to remember what season it was. And it comes up throughout the series. So, anyway. Sometime in the first, like, 3 seasons, I believe, we figure out that Eric has several sisters. I think 3 is what we end up learning, but he only ever really talks to one of them, where you hear him, like, call her name and, like, you know, hear him talk about her, is Marisol. That is also important, but let's put a pin in that. So at some point, I think in maybe season 1 or season 2, Callie was dating this guy named Hagen. So Hagen was actually the partner of Ray. And so he has ties to Horatio, and then he dates Callie for a time. But it was kind of an ill-fated relationship, because I feel like they were kind of an odd couple, and I also feel like he was a little old for her. And he had a lot of mental instability, which, again, is important later. So, actually, something we learn about Callie is that her father is an alcoholic, which will be important later. He's an alcoholic, but he's trying to recover, and he is trying to win this one case. And they have to, like, dig into a cold case or, like, a solved case in order to do it. Of course, she's not allowed to work on it because it's a conflict of interest. So she asks Eric to do it for her, and he meets her father, and her father really seems to like him. But at the same time, Hagen is kind of like, they don't really get along. And that to me is really funny. And she ends up breaking up with Hagen because he basically told Eric not to even bother looking at a piece of evidence. And she's like, no, not in my lab. And then she broke up with him. And then in season 3, at some point, remember, Speed is dead. Ryan Wolf comes in. He was a newbie patrol officer, and he ended up getting a job at CSI, and it was a little rocky at first, but eventually it kind of worked out. One of his first cases actually had something to do with Callie's father, so of course it was awkward. And then there's the Hagen thing. So the Hagen thing is important because it set off a chain reaction. So I think it was at the end of season 3. Maybe it was some other time, but I think it was in early season 3, or sorry, late season 3 or like mid season 3. But I think it was at the end. I think it was the finale. So basically, they were working this case. Maybe it was like at a club or something. Not 100% sure. But basically, Hagen stole a piece of evidence, and because he didn't want Callie to see him, because I guess he had taken it and then she walked into the room and he was afraid she'd see him. So he ended up like kind of sneaking behind her with a gun and like cocking it. Like he wasn't actually going to shoot her, but like he did that, and of course that really freaked her out. Like he walked away, like he kind of hid or left or whatever. And then she runs out of the building and she's like pointing her gun, and I think Ryan was out there, and she's like, "You wouldn't hold a gun to my head, would you?" And he's like, "No, like, why would I do that? That would be stupid." And it's like, yeah, boy, that would be stupid. Well, and then I don't know if Eric was there too. I don't remember. I don't really remember any specific details, but what he ends up doing is he ends up helping her figure out what gun it was, because she's like, "I would know it if I heard it. I didn't see the gun because it was behind me, but I didn't see who wielded it, but it's important that I figure out what gun it was, because then I can figure out who the person is, because I can track who it's registered to if I know what it is." So he basically, like, she would probably only let Eric do this, but they go through the firearms lab, and basically she lets him cock guns next to her head so that she can hear the clicking of the different pieces of the gun. And they eventually find out that it's like a Ruger or something like that. I know I'm going into way too much detail, but it's kind of important because it kind of is the smoking gun. I know it is actually a gun, but anyway, they figure out that it's Hagen who held the gun to her head, and that he's the one who took the piece of evidence so he could look like a hero. And he apparently wanted to propose to Callie, and she had broken up with him, and he kept trying to get back with her, and she's like, "Look, dude, I'm not going to go out with you again. And you need to get it through your head. Like, I'm trying to be nice about this, but you're kind of trying my nerves." Well, then he ends up killing himself in her firearms lab. So she resigns as the firearms expert for a while. She eventually takes it back because the guy who was running it wasn't doing a good job. And she's like, no, not in my lab. So, you know, it is what it is. So season 3, I don't remember a lot of season 3, if I'm being honest. That's basically it's the thing where Speed isn't there anymore, because he's only in like the first episode, I think. And then we get Ryan a few episodes later. And then you have the thing with her dad, you have the thing with Hagen. And I think that's actually when they find Ray, and then they go, like, Horatio sends them to Brazil. So like the first 3 seasons are broadly him dealing with his past. So then we get into the slightly more modern seasons. I say slightly more modern, and this is like 2005 or something like this. 2005, 2006 is season 4, I believe. And so this season is crazy. Like, this has so much action. There's so much plot. But I love it. My favorite one is actually 5. But anyway, I have my reasons. But season 4, we kind of get introduced to Marisol. Now, we've heard her name. She is Eric's sister, and I think she's his closest sister, both in age and in relationship. Like, they are tight. Like, they bicker a little bit, but they love each other to death. And, like, they would do anything for each other, essentially, which is also important. So, basically, she realized that she had cancer. And so, Eric has been, like, taking care of her, basically at her beck and call. Taking her to her treatments, being in the room while she medicates. And his job is starting to suffer because he's trying to do too many things. And he's also still kind of depressed from Speed dying. And he did go through a period after Speed died where he was like engaging in a lot of irresponsible behavior, like even more than he normally was. And like he was a bit of a playboy, and like you could definitely tell he was in a fraternity at some point, because he was constantly having like wild nights out is what I meant. But anyway, and I remember at one time Speed had said, every day's like a surprise party with you. and yeah, so anyway, so Eric is finally like, he was finally kind of doing a little bit better, and then his sister got sick. And then now he's like trying to keep her safe, and there's this plot line with the gangs, and Natalia is a new character in this season. He's also still bickering with Ryan because Ryan's kind of the newbie, and he's a good guy, but he's just kind of not tactful sometimes. And Eric just has no patience for that. Like, he's just like, I have so much going on in my life. I really don't want to listen to him be him. But anyway, so he ends up having to ask Callie's advice a number of times. At one point, his sister gets arrested for buying drugs. I mean, she is a cancer patient, and she's doing it for nausea and like pain and stuff, but she also bought some for her cancer support group and didn't realize that it was like a felony, and so her arrest did kind of like go away, but basically Horatio had to do it in a very specific way in order so that she wouldn't suffer, because he's like, she has cancer, like, yeah, she shouldn't have done it, but at the time, she didn't know it was wrong, and now she knows that it was wrong, and he's like, this cannot happen again, and she's like, okay, and he figured out a way to make it go away, but I know Eric was like worried about, of course she was worried about it too, but anyway, so that from that point on, Horatio kind of started taking care of Marisol a little bit, because he was like, Eric, I really need you in the lab to be doing your thing, so I will take care of your sister, so you don't have to worry about her, she'll be fine. And he's like, okay. He's like, this is kind of weird, but I think it was just because Horatio and Marisol kind of bonded a bit, and I think he just saw how stressed out Eric was trying to, like, be everything for his sister. And so he's like, if I take this burden from him, then both him and Marisol will feel better. And actually, I'll feel better, too, because he ends up falling in love with Marisol and they get married. But then she dies because the Malinoche were pissed at Horatio, and so they kill her. And so she dies, and then Horatio and Eric, for the season premiere of season 5, they go to Brazil. And that is important. They track down Riaz, they kill him, and in the midst of this, Ray is actually killed. And Ray Jr., he was actually, I think at one point in time, he was like smuggling drugs, but I think it was actually to get close to the person who was like manipulating his father. We did watch this episode recently, and I was trying to figure out like why, because it made it look a certain way and then it wasn't that way. I don't know. Oh, and another important thing with season 4 that I forgot to mention is Natalia got a grant from like the FBI to work on these cold cases. She has an ex-husband named Nick who used to beat her, and he went to jail for breaking her arm and like sending her to the hospital. And obviously like they got divorced, but then when he gets out, I think, is this season 4 or is this season 5? I really don't remember. I think it's season 5. But Nick gets out and he is like harassing Natalia, but he's trying to make it seem like she's the crazy one. And I don't know if I said this before, but Eric dated Natalia in season 4 for like a window of time. So anyway, and Natalia ended up being, like, the FBI was kind of using her to spy on people in the lab. So that's a plot point. So season 5, Eric and Horatio track down Riaz, who killed Marisol, or like put out the hit on Marisol. Memo Fierro was actually the one who actually shot her, but like it was Riaz's call. He's the one who said shoot her. And she died. So anyway. Sorry. Natalia became a CSI, but she doesn't have her gun yet. So she has to like shadow different people. So whenever Callie, Eric, or Ryan is at a scene, she shadows them. And eventually, like seasons later, she does. Is it season 6? I think at some point she does get her gun. I can't remember exactly when it is. I feel like it's probably 6 because I don't think they'd wait till 7. That seems a little too long. So I'm like, how long does it really take to go through firearms training? I don't know. I wouldn't know. But anyway, so all right. So season 5, I already said the thing about Marisol and Riaz, and Ray actually dies this time. And Yelena and Ray Jr. actually, I think they moved back to Florida. And Yelena goes into like being a private eye, because she used to be like homicide and robbery. Like that was her job. Like she was basically a homicide detective. And robbery. Well, I think the department is called robbery homicide. So she worked that. Like that was kind of her job. But then she went into the private eye business because I think she just like needed to do something different. So anyway, that's what she was doing. And so at one point in season 5, Ryan, this is near the end, Ryan gets himself fired because he was gambling on the job. And then he lied about it. And he also had a connection to someone who was like a known felon. And so he got fired, but he did eventually get reinstated in season 6. At some point, I don't really remember when that was. But anyway, before that happened, I don't know why I decided to mention it there. But Eric actually got shot in the head. They were on a case, and him and Horatio were trying to find a stenographer from the court who had been kidnapped, and she was supposed to be in the trunk of a Mercedes. And so they were looking at all the Mercedes, like in the car, like the trunk. They were trying to like see if she was in there. Well, they had tried a car already and she wasn't in there. And then they were like gonna try another car, but then there was a shootout. And people were shooting at them, and eventually Eric got shot in like the thigh, like the upper thigh, I think. And of course, like he's in pain, and I guess it was like a really tender spot, and so he was still trying to like shoot, but because of the angle he was at, because he was on the ground now, and the angle that the perps were at, like he couldn't really get a clean shot of them. Eventually Horatio killed at least like 1 or 2 of them. And then Eric actually, well, Horatio got him like behind a car, but then someone else shot him in the head. And he didn't look like he was gonna make it. He did make it, but he had some memory loss. He couldn't remember that Marisol was dead. And of course, Callie's the one who realized that he didn't remember his sister was dead. And Horatio had to tell him that Marisol was dead. And then Eric had a tear come down his face. And I was like, oh, can't. Whenever a man cries, it just makes me cry. Anyway, so then Eric is recovering from his brain injury, and he comes back to work and everything, but he makes a few little mistakes. But then one of my favorite arcs ever starts to happen, where they add a flirtation between him and Callie, who always kind of looked like a couple even though it was never pursued. But yeah, one day she kisses him on the cheek when he says, I appreciate you for helping me. She's like, well, I appreciate you for appreciating me. She gets him on her tiptoes, kisses him on the cheek, and then she walks away batting her eyelashes and smiling at him. I don't know what he was supposed to make of that. And then, they have another scene in the next episode where they make googly eyes at each other. And he takes a splinter of glass out of her finger. And she, whispers his name really, softly. And there's so much sexual tension, you could cut it with a knife. It's a big, juicy cheesecake. But anyway. But then I think that episode with the splinter of glass is actually the one where Ryan gets himself fired. So that's interesting. And then at the end of the season, he's still fired, but he's working on getting reinstated. He just isn't yet. So he's doing all these other odd jobs, trying to get by because he needs to work. But he occasionally will be doing one of his little odd jobs to get by, and he'll realize, oh, there's this case going on that I think my friends are working, and I found something interesting when I was doing my new job work stuff. And so he'll be like, hey, so this is Ryan, and I was working on this, and I heard you guys were working on this case. I think I have something that will help you, so can I come by? And they're like, okay, whatever. And he comes by, and, they're like, oh, okay, good eye, thanks. But we get to take it to the judge. And he's like, all right. But yeah, so then at the end of season 5, we have basically Jake, who is Callie's ex-boyfriend, who came into the picture in season 5, I believe. They actually apparently get back together, and I'm not exactly sure what all the details are in this, because it kind of seemed like it didn't seem like she was dating anybody. That Jake had come back into her life, but she didn't seem like she was dating him. That he was just kind of there. She had dated him in the past, but they weren't currently dating. But as soon as she starts to have this little flirtation with Eric, then we learn, an episode or two later, which is right before the finale, that she is actually apparently dating Jake. And of course, when Eric finds that out, he's like, okay, because I kind of got the sense that she was flirting with me, and I kind of liked that she was flirting with me, but now she's not flirting with me, and she's apparently dating Jake for some reason. And he's trying to figure it out, because he's like, 1 minute she was flirting with me, and the next minute she's dating Jake. What is up with that? Was I supposed to do something with her flirting? Because I didn't even really realize she was doing it until after she'd already done it. And I, since she doesn't want to date co-workers, what was I going to say? But he realizes that, I think Eric realizes at first that he has a crush on her, and then he realizes he's actually in love with her. But anyway, at the end of the season, Jake was kind of injured and all that, but then when they get back to the lab, they're getting ready to leave, and he kisses her, and she doesn't push him away or anything, But Eric sees the kiss, and you could tell his little heart just heartbroken. But then she realizes that he saw the kiss, and she feels bad about it. Because I think she knows she kind of led him on a bit, or like taught him to hope that something could happen just to rip it away from him. And she feels really bad about it. But, she's still dating Jake, and they actually go to Antigua together, apparently. So then you have the season premiere of 6. So, 6, Horatio figures out that he has a son named Kyle. And Kyle is a very troubled youth, and his mother is a woman named Julia. And Julia is a bit bipolar, and I forget what her deal was, but, basically, Horatio is his father, and Julia is his mother. And Horatio apparently used to be, I think it was John Walden. He was undercover, and he was using the name John Walden, I believe. And he was dating Julia, I guess. And I guess she got pregnant with Kyle, and then eventually, like, she didn't tell him. And I don't know if she, like, couldn't contact him because, like, his thing ended, or, like, if she just chose not to call him. I don't really know. I don't remember. But anyway, so she, I think, gave Kyle up for adoption. He was bounced around the foster care system. I don't know if he was ever, like, adopted or anything, but basically, he's a troubled youth. He's been in juvie, and he got roped into a scheme by some guy who actually is David Gallagher from Seventh Heaven. I mean, he was in other stuff too, but like, oh man. Simon from Seventh Heaven is in this episode. But anyway, so that happens, and Horatio's kind of dealing with Kyle and like realizing that he has a son because he like didn't know about this kid, and of course he's a teenager and he's in so much trouble, and Horatio's like trying to get him to have some purpose in life and like not to make dumb decisions, but he's a teenager and teenagers are stupid, and like, don't you even lie about it. Like, if you're an adult and you were a teenager at some point, because, like, that's how it works, like, you were an idiot at some point. And I was an idiot, I can tell you that much. But yeah, so anyway, so season 6, eventually Ryan gets put back on the force. I believe Natalia eventually gets her gun. Eventually, I think Stetler starts, like, cracking down on like inter-office romance. His time could probably be better spent elsewhere, but I guess he has to make a living. Which, that'll come back later. But basically, I don't remember a lot of season 6. I mean, I remember the Callie and Eric stuff because that's the stuff I care about. But I do remember Ryan got back on the force, and Natalia, I think, got her gun. I remember Kyle and stuff. And I know at some point during season 6, I'm not exactly sure when, but actually Alex leaves. And it had something to do with, like, her son. And he got himself in trouble. And she had to, like, go close to the line. And she did feel bad about it. But she's like, I don't really have a choice. It's my son. And then she's like, you know what? I don't think I can look at these dead bodies anymore. Because she's the ME. So that's kind of her job. And I think she just realizes she needs to make a change. And so she ends up being, like, in the ER, which, again, will come back later. So some point in season 6, oh, man, there's something that happens. I think it was, like, at the beginning of season 5, which was when Horatio tracked down Riaz and whatnot. So there were some other things involved in that, too. And basically, Horatio at one point was like extradited to Brazil to like stand trial for killing Riaz, I guess. But like it was a sham trial, and they were basically just gonna kill him. Like that's what they were gonna do. But he, of course, because he's Horatio, and he ended up like killing all of them. He got rid of all of them in this like shootout. And kind of like while this is happening, Callie actually is kidnapped. She's abducted from a scene. So in order to explain this, I have to go back a little bit. So, all right. So Cooper, who is kind of their computer person, he, I guess, found Speedle's credit card. And Speedle, like I said, has been dead since early season 3. So he, I guess, got into Speedle's locker, found his credit card, and started using it. Like he applied for a new card, like basically with Speed's name, and he was just using the credit card. And like that's fraud. So eventually Callie and Eric figure it out, and I think Horatio too. Like they figure it out and they confront him about his actions, and he just doesn't even feel bad about it. And she's like, well, because Callie's doing this, because Eric's just like, I can't even with him. Because like he just is beyond done. So Callie is like, you're gonna have to turn yourself in, and if you don't turn yourself in, I will find you and arrest you myself. And she's like, because he was basically saying, well, he's not gonna miss it, he's dead. And he's like, like no one got hurt and whatever. She's like, that doesn't even matter, like it's illegal, like you did something against the law. But she's like, you don't think I got hurt? No, she said, you don't think Eric got hurt? You don't think I'm hurt? What about the people that Speedo gave his life for? And she's like, you're stealing from a dead man. And she's like, that's not okay. Like, that is so wrong. And you don't even see how wrong it is. And you need to turn yourself in, or I'm going to do it for you. And so he gets fired, and he is mad at her for him getting fired because he did a stupid thing that was illegal. And so what he does is he makes this website called Solve a Crime with Callie, and it's basically meant to kind of humiliate her and discredit her and make her look stupid and like tarnish her reputation, because her reputation's like spotless. And what ends up happening is he finds out like he knows her number, and he leaks it. Well, then she changes her phone number because she's getting harassed, and so he actually leaks her new number. And then the new number, these crooks use it to lure her to a crime scene that doesn't actually exist. So then they abduct her and force her to try to cover up a murder. I'm saying that in quotations because she kind of does it, but she leaves clues for her friends, basically. So then everything works out all right. She gets out of it all right. But then, of course, her and Eric have a moment afterwards. They're not dating at this point, and I don't think she's dating Jake either, which I guess I'll get into that. But basically, Eric, he's like, I don't know what I would have done if something would have happened to you today. And he's basically saying, I know you don't need it, but I really need you not to be alone tonight. Because I'm not okay. I'm not okay. And she's like, okay. And I guess he takes her home and he like hangs out with her and whatever. So sometime I think before this, there were a few things that happened. They are important, but I don't feel like going into it. The Bang Bang Now You're Dead episode, the one with Cooper, that one was when Eric was having transitory hallucinations and he thought he saw Speed. And so it was even weirder when the case ended up having something to do with like Cooper using Speed's credit card. So that was something. There was also an episode, I think in early season 6 or mid season 6, where Stetler was like poking around about like the sexual harassment thing. And he was actually talking about Natalia and Eric, even though they haven't dated for like 2 years at this point. The Stetler's a bit behind on his gossip. But basically, Eric thinks he's talking about Callie and Jake. So he's like, if you have something to say to them, just say it to them. Don't say it to me. He's like, oh, well, I wasn't aware anything was going on with them. I actually was referring to you and Bo Vista. And then as soon as Stetler walks away, Eric's like, crap. And he calls Callie, but she doesn't get the message. And he's basically like, I think I just put you in a jam. He's like, I didn't mean to do that. I thought he was talking about something else. And of course she was pissed. She's like, how would he even know what was going on in my personal life? Because, like, you're the only one who knows other than me and Jake. So because of that, I can only assume that you're the one who told him. Because I didn't tell him. And, like, Jake doesn't care enough to tell him. So, like, you know, but it ends up where she was like, well, Jake breaks up with her to kind of save his own skin. She's just like, okay, whatever. And eventually, like, her and Eric are on good terms. It's like the next episode or something. They're on better terms. And she's like, you know what? You probably just sped up the inevitable. And, like, he was gonna find out eventually. You just kind of sped it up, and I know you didn't do it on purpose. Like, you know how Stetler is. But, and then, and I think she was also talking about the inevitability of her and Jake breaking up eventually. Like, he was always going to choose the job over me. Like, he always was. And Eric ends up saying, if it were me, I would have transferred to the night shift. Like, that was like, he's like, that's a much easier solution. Like, if you want to be with somebody, you don't just, like, dump them for a career. Like, you make it work. Like, you're like, oh, I'll transfer to the night shift, or I'll go to this department, or something like that. Whatever makes it work so you can date that person and still do your job. But yeah, so anyway, that happens, and they have a few little moments, and we're still dealing with all the Kyle stuff. And then season 7, I think there's something with, like, is it the Russian mob? Or is it some other gang? I don't really remember, if I'm being honest. But Horatio ends up having to fake his own death at the end of season 6. And, like, into season 7. And I think it also had something to do with Julia. I don't know if Julia was still alive. I think she dies at some point, but I don't know when. Anyway. I don't remember. But, I know Horatio, in quotation marks, dies. And, Ryan had to, like, help him fake his own death. And oh my gosh, like, this is the most bizarre episode. It's so good. Well, it's kind of 2-part because it's like a finale and a premiere. But, basically, they hear that, like, Horatio's, well, I'm talking about Callie and Eric. They hear that, Horatio has been shot. And, of course, that's their boss and that's their friend. And they've known him the longest. So they're like, what happened? And they're like rushing to the scene, like they're in the Hummer together, because of course they are. And then when they get there, his body's already gone, and Ryan's at the scene, and they're like, where is he? Like, where is he? We want to see him. Like, what happened? What happened? And Ryan's like, well, I released the body. And they're like, what? Why did you release the body? Like, I think there's something with the policy, and I'm not really sure, or like in the handbook, like if the man in charge dies in the line of duty, or is like mortally wounded where he could die, like you're supposed to call the team and have them all meet there. I don't know. It made more sense in the episode, but I haven't seen it in ages, so like I don't remember what happens or like why certain things happen, like when they do. But basically what happened was Horatio had to fake his own death, and when he did that, he actually asked Ryan, because he normally would have asked Eric, because Eric's like his brother-in-law. I mean, Marisol's dead, but Eric's essentially his brother-in-law. And so you would think that he would ask Eric, and Eric was actually kind of hurt that Horatio asked Ryan to help him fake his own death. and Horatio's like, that's exactly the reason why I didn't ask you. He's like, okay, so there's several reasons for this. Okay, so because we are so close and we've known each other forever, and I was married to your sister, because of that, you were the obvious choice. That's why I didn't pick you. And he's like, also, I knew that Callie would never believe that you would have anything to do with this. And you probably wouldn't be able to keep it from her. And she would never do this either. So, like, the two of you would never believe that the other had anything to do with this. But you probably would be a little suspicious of Ryan. So he knows his team so well. And he's like, yeah, I can't ask Callie or Eric to do it because, you know, they're thicker than thieves, but in the best way possible. And he's like, and Eric's my former brother-in-law, so like obviously I can't ask him to do it because he's the obvious choice, and also like that would put him in a position, and like Callie would never believe that he would do it. So like he's like, I needed to sell that I was dead. And basically, if Ryan could get you guys to believe that I was dead, and could get you really good and mad and upset and like whatever, that was like the best thing humanly possible to sell that I was dead. So then they're like, okay, I guess, all right. And I really don't remember what all came of that, but basically we start season 7. So season 7 is a trip. I think Kyle maybe starts doing some like odd jobs. I don't really remember. I don't know if, what's her face? Julia is still alive or not in this season. I know she dies at some point. And I know they have like an ME. It's like their first or second day on the job, and they actually got killed. And then they get another ME named Tara Price, who I actually really liked her, but I guess they had her as like an interim, like the actress, like they had her for like a temporary time. And then that ME ended up, she had a drug problem with like oxycodone, and you don't want that. So she was like stealing medicine from not patients, but dead people. And so she got fired. And so she was only there for like a few handful of episodes. And I think Kyle started working as an ME assistant. And Callie and Eric keep getting closer. and eventually, like, his therapist gets killed. There's a thing with the Russian mob, which is, like, a big part. And then Callie and Eric do actually get together, and this is in the time frame where he figures out that his birth certificate is a lie, like it's a fake, and that he wasn't actually born here. He was born in Cuba, and his dad is not his real dad. His dad is actually this guy named Sharova, who was like a CIA operative who was pretending to be Russian or has Russian descent but is an American. And he was working in Cuba when Eric was getting ready to be conceived, and he made Eric's mom do inappropriate things. So he's not a good person, as you can see. I mean, I think he ended up being okay to Eric, like, in the end, but he did put a hit out on him at some point. So, anyway, families, can't live with them, can't live without them. Especially when they order a hit on you, a normal Tuesday. Anyway, so it is definitely a season of stuff that happens. And at some point in this season, sometime in this season, like I said, like Callie and Eric were dating. We have that whole thing with Eric's past. And then season finale is an episode where I guess Sharova's in some kind of trouble, and Eric's trying to, like, help him out of it, but he's in a difficult position because he is a cop, but yet he just found his real father, and so he's trying to, like, be there for him. Like, Sharova was actually there for him. Like, he got him out of ICE, because he was about to be deported because he was, like, an illegal immigrant, in quotation marks. He wasn't really. Now, his birth certificate was a fake. He was born in Cuba, but his father, like his real father, is actually an American. He was born here in New Mexico. So, because his father stood up for him and was like, hey, I'm from New Mexico and he is my son. Because he did that, Eric was set free. The only thing that maybe could have been done is Callie could have married him. And actually, to be honest, I would have preferred that. Because, that would have been an interesting plot point. But at the end of season 7, Eric was trying to get his father out of a sticky situation. And I guess something happened and Callie was called with Ryan to, like, take care of a situation. I think there was, like, a heist going on or, like, a prison break. I don't remember. But basically, a car was getting away. So she was like, okay, and they were shooting at the car. Maybe Ryan was taking somebody else and whatever. And so she ended up shooting at the car, and then she realized that Eric was in the car. And he kind of ran off the road a bit, and then they couldn't find him. And I guess he, like, crawled through the swamp or, like, the Everglades, and apparently he was suffering from, like, hypoxia or like, hypopoxemia, which is, like, lack of oxygen to the organs. You don't want that. But basically, yeah, that's season 7. So that's how season 7 ends, where they're all searching for Eric. And then season 8 starts, and Eric's in grave condition, but he does live. So this is a weird season because Adam Rodriguez actually was only kind of on it back and forth. I don't think he wanted to be done with the show. I just think that maybe part of his contract was up. And I also think there was something where he was supposed to guest star on another show, and he couldn't be a full-time, like, star on this show and be on that show. So, and I also think he was preparing to do some directing for this show, like, for Miami. I know he I think wrote and directed like one or two episodes. I don't really know. It wasn't like a whole bunch, but he did do that. I kind of forgot that he did that, but he did do that. So that was fun. But yeah, this season's kind of wonky. I don't know exactly when Tom, the ME, came in, but I really don't like him, if I'm being honest. Oh, season 7, I forgot. Callie actually had a near-death experience, too. It was, she inhaled too much smoke at a crime scene, and she almost died. But basically, that's kind of how her and Eric got together. This sounds really weird. They were kind of teetering on the edge of getting together anyway, but basically what happened was he said all these nice things while she was in the hospital. He was like, I can't imagine going to work without you. I can't imagine living my life without you. He put his watch on her wrist so she would know she wasn't alone, even when he had to leave to like figure out who did what with the crime. So she wakes up and she talks to him and she's like, I knew you were there. I heard what you said. And then they get together after that. But you don't really see them together until like the next episode or the next few episodes, and that's the ice episode. And then, you know, things unfold as you go throughout the series. But season 8 is kind of like, it's a weird season, but you have a new character named Walter who stays for the rest of the show, and then you have Jesse, who's a character that's only in season 8, I believe, and maybe like the first episode of season 9, but he dies. Spoiler alert. He dies. And they have that like flashback episode to 1997, which gives you like the lore of how these characters met, which is really funny. And it basically tells you that the first time Eric met Callie, he hit on her. And she was like, I don't date people that I'm even remotely connected with through my job. But then he's like, all right. And then later he says, we'll see. He's like, it's almost as if they know the future, that he's gonna date her one day, because they obviously did know that. So season 8 is a bit of a blur to me because it wasn't my favorite, but you definitely have some spicy moments between Eric and Callie whenever they are actually in scenes together. You kind of get the sense that either they live together, or at least he's over at her house a lot. Like, a lot. Like, he spends most of his time at her house. But you also get the sense that he goes and does other things. Like, because he actually gets other jobs that are, like, connected to CSI. Because he leaves because I think it was, like, everything with the injury and, like, everything that happened with his father and the fact that he's dating Callie and he's not really supposed to, in quotation marks. And I think there was just this really bad case, and he was like, you know what, I don't think I can do this at the moment. So he kind of turns it in, and he does some other jobs that are like related to his job. And I think all of season 8, he doesn't, well, not all of season 8, but once he leaves for the most part, but he's still popping in and out of the lab. They see him at crime scenes, so he's still in the show, and he still has like Callie moments because of course. And of course, any episode that Adam directs or writes, it always has Callie in it, because like Emily and Adam are like really good friends, so of course he's gonna want to have Callie there. But yeah, this season's weird. There's this whole thing with, like, Jesse's past that I don't really care about because I don't like that character. Walter's just kind of zany. I don't think he's the brightest crayon in the box, but he's funny and he has a good sense of humor. He's just kind of a jovial dude. And I think a little bit of a flirtation starts to strike up between Natalia and Ryan, but I also think she kind of has a little bit of a flirtation with Jesse. And, like, it is funny because she did used to date Eric back in season 4. And she's kind of off and on, like, sort of jokingly flirted with Ryan. And I don't know. I don't know about those two. What ends up happening with them. But yeah, season 8's kind of wonky. At the end, there's this, what's his face? Kyle. He ends up going into the army or the Marines or something, and so he gets deployed. So that's that. And at the end of season 8, there's this all fall down episode where there's this weird serial killer dude, and he is sending these creepy letters to the CSIs, and they end up like all passed out on the floor because he poisoned their air supply, because they have their own filtration system because they're a lab and they deal with chemicals and like evidence and stuff, so it needs to be like controlled. So he puts like halon gas or something, and like everybody passes out. So it's almost like a whole bunch of dead people. Like they're not all of them are dead. I think Jesse was the only one who actually died, which I was okay with. I don't like him very much, and he did nothing to me. It's just I miss Eric, so you know I'm biased. But anyway, so, yeah, that happened, and Eric arrives at the lab, and he's like, and he's like, why is everybody passed out on the floor? And he looks around, and he's like, he sees Walter, and he's like, oh, Walter, what's going on? And he can't get him to wake up, so he's like, oh no, because he sees everybody is passed out, and he like, Callie, he makes a beeline for her, he finds her, and he picks her up, and he's like dragging himself, and he's like getting ready to pass out, and he's like carrying her, he's trying to get her into the elevator and out of there, but he just can't make it, because he's just breathing too much of the gas. And Horatio has figured out what's going on by now, so he goes to the lab to try to figure out, like, what he's gonna do. And he gets there, and when he sees Eric, he's, like, almost passed out on the floor, like, carrying Callie. He's like, okay, air. Yeah, air. He shoots the windows and gets some fresh air into there, and then they work on the filtration system and whatever when people start waking up, and like of course Callie wakes up, and she's okay, which is, it's like, thank God. So I remember this, I think, was the season where Emily Proctor was pregnant, and so they had to like hide her pregnancy, and I know there was like one episode where she wasn't in it because I think she was on maternity leave. So there's like one episode where she's not in it, and it's like the only episode in the entire show that she's credited for but not in. And I do think they talk about her, so it's almost as if she's there, but like she isn't actually in the episode, which is so weird. I remember like, oh, well, I guess Emily's having her baby. Like that's why. But yeah, so season 9, I don't remember a lot of it, but I think that's the state attorney one. So this is like the jewel thief one, and it ends up, spoiler alert, Stettler is guilty. So all these years he's been penning things on the CSIs, but I think season 9, finally he gets his comeuppance, and like Ryan, Horatio, and Eric get to like put the nail in the coffin and put him away because he deserves it. And then that's like really all I remember. I think at the end of season 9, Horatio almost died. And like, of course, they used Marisol a lot for this one. Again, I'm very rusty on like the last 2 seasons. I actually remember more of season 8, but like season 9 and 10 I'm like really fuzzy on. I think there was an episode in either season 8 or season 9 where Callie had a thing with smoke again. Which I don't know why they did the same thing twice. It wasn't exactly the same, but there was some kind of incident that may have been with a fire. And I think it's because she already had problems with that. That's the reason why it comes back. Because it's like, if you're already exposed to it, then you're probably going to be more sensitive to it in the future. And especially like with that halon gas thing that ended up happening. I think the halon gas thing happened after this. I think maybe it was a season 7 and then a season 8 episode where that happened. But anyway, she had like an out-of-body experience. It was very strange. Season 10, man. I think somewhere in either season 9 or season 10, Callie ended up like meeting these kids named Austin and Patty. And she ended up deciding she wanted to adopt them. And that was a whole thing. And I don't really remember anything else. But she did end up getting the kids in the end. I think I'd totally forgotten about this, but I think Ryan had like a flirtation with some girl. And either she got murdered or she broke up with him or she ended up being a criminal. I don't really remember. And so he was kind of bummed about that. But yeah, like that, the 10th season is wild and I don't really remember any of it. I think it's because they didn't know exactly when it was ending, so it was kind of hard to like gauge it. But that's always a thing that annoys me about like shows, especially when they're long running and then they just get like canceled randomly and like they don't really get a chance to wrap everything up. What really irritated me, like I liked the fact that Callie got the kids, but I don't like that she ended up not being a part of like the end scene where they're all together. I realize logistically it doesn't make sense because like she just got kids, like she just adopted literal children. So like going to a bar is probably not somewhere she should be, and I don't think the kids are allowed there. So if they were going to a bar, I can totally see why the kids wouldn't be there and why Callie wouldn't be there either. But because the show was ending, I really would have liked to see her there. Because she wasn't like leaving the lab or anything. She was just adopting kids. And they all knew she was adopting the kids. But I just felt like it was a little weird not to have her in the ending scene. I mean, I guess they could have just made it so it was a restaurant with a bar, and like, and you know, I don't know. That just kind of like makes me a little sad. I don't know why, because like Callie is the like most senior member of the team, like right under Horatio. So, and she was like she was there for the entire show. So I'm like, it just seemed, and she was in the episode. It's not like she wasn't in the episode. She just wasn't in the ending scene, and I didn't like that. That just didn't sit right with me. If I could change anything about the show other than like it ending kind of abruptly, I mean, honestly, I probably would have had it go on for like another at least half a season or like another season, or at least a handful more episodes, like just to wrap up the loose plot threads. And to be honest, I know they decided not to make Emily Proctor's pregnancy like Callie's pregnancy, because a lot of times shows will be like, okay, so do we want Callie to have a kid, or because like Emily's pregnant, so like do we want Callie to have a kid, or do we just want to hide Emily's pregnancy and just like go from there? I kind of wish in hindsight that they would have just made her have a baby. Like, to me, I would have preferred that. Because to me, that would make more sense. But I'm glad she adopted the kids. It's not that. But I feel like they wouldn't have had to do all that rigmarole with, like, legalities and stuff. But I think they did that on purpose. But, like, I don't know. I could have done without it. And, like, since the baby would be a baby, like, she could say, like, yeah, my mom's watching the baby, or like, I have a babysitter today, or something like that. Or, you know, maybe they go to her house, or maybe, like, you know, they go to a park and meet or something. Like, you know what I'm talking about. Like, they could have done it a different way to incorporate Callie in there more. And they also could have made it so that instead of having to adopt kids, she actually had her own kid. I'm not saying, like, adopting kids is bad. I don't have a problem with that. But just, like, since Emily was already pregnant and then they decided later to have her adopt kids, I'm just like, why didn't you just make her have a kid? It seems like the much easier option. But what do I know? So, maybe it was just the timing. I don't know. But yeah. that was the one thing that, like, really irked me. But then again, I really do have to, like, rewatch the show. We're gonna be on season 6. I've been watching, like, little clips of the various seasons. But, like, even season 1 and season 2, I've seen them, but I'm just, like, really rusty. But yeah, so anyway, now I've talked for well over an hour. I didn't mean to make this long, but when a show's on for 10 years, like, what do you expect?